All right, so I'm sorry, 1 second. There we go. So welcome everyone today to our second session of our Lunch and Learn virtual series with Care Farming Network. Today we're going to be talking about building healthy relationships at work. And we're really excited to have a presenter with us. Catherine McLaughlin is certified as a sexuality educator by the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And Catherine is also the founder of Disability Workshops, now Elevatus Training. She is the CEO, lead trainer, and she delivers Elevatus's live and online trainings and is also the author of Sexuality Education for People with Developmental Disabilities curriculum, and also develops educational materials for others to use in teaching and communications. So we are thrilled to have you here, Catherine. Thank you for joining us. The way that our flow is going to go today is Catherine's going to share information with us. You are more than welcome during some of the pauses to ask questions if you have them. Um, I'm here to help monitor the chat through Care Farming Network. We can also stop and folks should be able to unmute themselves and ask questions too. I also just want to note that this presentation is supported by some funding that Care Farming Network has received from the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. So we are grateful for that funding that has come our way that is allowing us to share training such as this. So without any further ado, Catherine, thank you for joining us, and I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. Uh, as was mentioned, I'm a sexuality educator and trainer, and I've been doing this work for over 30 years. And in particular, my work has focused on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and sexuality education. And one of the things that has come up along the way is, well, you can see on the screen here, there's teams of self-advocate professional presenters. So one of the things when I first started doing this work was I went to work with Green Mountain Self-Advocates in Vermont. I'm in New Hampshire. And I said, I'm going to create curriculum. There's not a lot of materials for this work. And they said, hold on, nothing about us without us. We want to be part of creating these materials. And we also want to be one of the teachers of this content as well. So a lot of my work has been training people with disabilities and professional teams to lead sexuality education classes. So the other thing that came up while I was working is Project Search, which is a integrated competitive employment program you might be familiar with. And they came to me because a lot of the interns that they have, so people with disabilities that are learning how to be employees, and they do rotations in hospitals and hotels and different things to learn about work life. And they came to me because they said people were losing their jobs, not because they couldn't do the job, but because they didn't quite understand this new kind of a relationship, this coworker relationship, or maybe it's customers or patients or all these, it's like a whole new environment. So they asked me to work on a curriculum with them, taking half of the sexuality education content and making it very much work related. So that's a lot of what the work I've done is working with Project Search around this as well. So we're going to talk about building healthy relationships at work and how you can teach those that you're supporting. I know that you're all in a professional role and you may be supporting individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities around work life. And so I've got some ideas around concepts you can teach them. And then also, how do you respond to certain behaviors or scenarios in the workplace and kind of reinforce the concepts through those sort of like teachable moments as well. So the goal for today is to We're going to gain knowledge about relationships and sexuality and specific issues for people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. Explore knowledge and skills for building healthy relationships at work, including the different types of relationships that we're in, public and private topics, places, and also just working with coworkers. And then explore ways to communicate about sexuality with people with disabilities. And, basically what I said before, we'll do kind of a quick introduction, types of relationships, public and private, and then responding to behaviors or situations or scenarios, responding to those. So that's really the three pieces of today. So I wanted to open this question up to all of you, and I'm actually going to do two questions because they kind of connect. And you could put your response in the chat, or you could unmute and tell us your thoughts. But why do you think it's important to teach relationships in the workplace? And the second question is, what's happening in the workplace because of a lack of education? So sort of like, what brings you here in a lot of ways? Why do you think this is an important topic, or what are you seeing that's making you want to learn more about this topic? And if you could put ideas in the chat or unmute and tell us your thoughts. Anyone? Thoughts about this? Well, that's all right. I mean, a lot of people talk about, well, similar to what I said about Project Search, that we've had relationships develop, thank you. We've had relationships develop in the workplace and have been uncertain how to handle them. Yes, right. Absolutely. Yeah. How do we manage this? And do you have any sorts of workplace policies around people dating that are working together or not? I know with Project Search, there was no dating among interns, but they could after they went through the program. But I think workplaces have their own policies around this. I haven't seen anything yet, but as we look forward to day programming one day and job training, we want to have knowledge and training in place. Yeah, sure. You haven't seen anything yet. Yeah, but sort of anticipating that you might. All interactions are a relationship. Absolutely. Yes. And many people with disabilities may have left a school setting and are now in the work setting. And it's a whole new world. And so we're going to talk about some different ways to teach, different concepts to teach. And then the last thing is kind of in general, well, what makes it difficult to teach healthy relationships in the workplace? Are there any barriers that you have around doing this? And some people, maybe you haven't seen anything yet, but you're sort of projecting that down the road, you might need this knowledge. What makes it difficult to address this topic with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities? And I think one person put uncertain about how to handle them. So I think that's often a barrier. Like, I don't quite know what to do about this situation. And if you have any others, you can put them in the chat, but I'm going to keep moving along here so we can cover the material. I think one of the things around why it's important is that, is that many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have not received any kind of sexuality education at all. And so they're in a new environment with no knowledge or skills, and things can happen. So they haven't received a lot of education elsewhere. Also, a lot of people learn from their parents because they're not learning in schools necessarily, or television, media, movies, social media, internet. So they're learning from either parents or the media. And many parents are worried about this topic. And so they feel like I shouldn't talk about it, because if I talk about it, it'll give them ideas and it'll make them, more at risk. And so I'm just not going to talk about it. So then that leaves the media as the sexuality and relationship educator for people with disabilities. And yeah, there might be some good things for people to learn from, but A lot of it is unhealthy kinds of messages too. So making an implicit explicit, but also realizing culture has a lot to do with what might consider implicit. Yeah. So sort of, I think of that as how do you kind of teach like the playbook or the social norms in the workplace as well. All right, so they haven't gotten them anywhere. Internet, they get lots of negative messages. So self-advocates have told me that when they were in the mainstream health class in school, they were removed when the sexuality unit started. So again, sort of negative, this isn't for you, you don't need this, and then therefore you have a lack of education. I also mentioned that interns or workers are losing their jobs, not because of the job that they're trying to do, but because of those social relationships, work relationships. Everyone deserves a full life, including a job and a relationship, if that's something that they want. All people are sexual beings, and being a sexual being doesn't mean that you're having sex. It means that you have a sexuality. And so it's an important topic for all to learn about. And we kind of have this narrow view that only certain people are sexual beings and people with disabilities are not considered that. And so we have to open up that box and say everyone is a sexual being and needs information. It reduces inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace, or some of those social norms or crossing boundaries are less likely to happen if you have some discussions and teaching around healthy boundaries in the workplace. And self-advocates are asking for relationship and sexuality education. They say, we need this, we want this information, and we want these relationships in our life as well. So if we're doing any kind of education around relationships and sexuality, these are sort of the ideas that you want to have in like the philosophy when you approach these topics. So we want the relationship and sexuality to be positive, that kind of education and messaging, not fear-based. You may have seen the movie Mean Girls, where the physical education teacher says, if you have sex, you will get chlamydia and you will die, right? Not true, and also very scary. So a lot of times we use those kind of messages in our culture to like scare people out of being sexual. And we want to be positive and inclusive in the way we talk about the topic. There's lots of topics to cover. So some of those, like you said, implicit cues, about how people function in a culture. We may have to teach some of that as well. We want education that empowers and gives information and helps people make their own choices. It's also inclusive of all gender and sexual identities. So no one feels invisible if you're teaching a class or if you're having conversations. We want to be inclusive in our language and our approach. And it just helps people become sexually healthy and have positive relationships. So those are the areas of what accounts for effective sexuality and relationship education. So we want to teach lots of different topics, and we're going to talk about a couple today. So types of relationships and how do you touch people in these different relationships, and what kind of topics do you talk about in these relationships as well? Public and private, what are public and private places? What are public and private behaviors, conversations? How do you have positive coworker relationships as well? So how do you engage in the workplace, at the lunch and learn, or at the lunch table, or wherever you might interact with your coworkers? How do you have positive relationships? Also, one of the things that comes up a lot for people with disabilities is that we often will say, no, not here. This is work, not here. But then we don't help them meet that need that they have. So if they have this need of being in a sexual romantic relationship or having friends or whatever sort of social relationship they're looking for, we often say, no, not here. But then we don't help them meet that need by learning, how do you meet friends? How do you meet a partner or a sweetheart or significant other? And so we want to teach, how do you make friends? How do you meet partners? How do you progress from meeting someone to asking them out on a date? Like, sort of, how do you court someone as well? What are healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships? How do you communicate in relationships and make decisions about relationships? So there's lots and lots of skills there too around decision making and communication. What is sexual harassment or crossing the line? And I'm assuming that many of you all have sexual harassment policies in the workplace, but many people with disabilities don't have access to that education or what the policy means. So having the policy in plain language so that people can, so it's cognitively accessible to them, so they can learn and then not cross that line as well. And also learning about consent too. And then just any workplace policies or rules, because often people are not taught those in a way that they can comprehend necessarily. So we want to make sure that we have all of the workplace policies in plain language, and so people have access to that information. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about types of relationships. And I'll probably stop in a little bit and just see if there's any questions or anything, and then move to the next section. But I think a big piece of being in relationships with others is sharing parts of ourselves. So this is one way that you can help someone sort of think about themselves and things that they can share with others. So I'm part of a basketball team. So things that you're part of. What am I like? I am silly, funny, serious, shy. Like, what do you like? And then what are some things you can do? I can farm, I can knit, I can play dominoes, like things. So I'm part of, I am, and I can. And those are ways for people to start engaging with others too. So talking about ourselves and knowing ourselves helps us have positive relationships. So really starting with the individual. And then just a couple things around consent, and this is really about touch. But I think in general, what we want to teach is that both people agree and want the touch. So if it's a high five or a hug or something like that, that there's an agreement there. But also that there's certain kinds of relationships where we don't touch certain ways as well. And we'll talk more about that. But we want to make sure both people say yes, and that the yes is freely chosen. And freely chosen means without threats or pressure or lies or blackmail or force. So making someone say yes is not freely chosen. So using a couple of examples, Susan and Paul. Susan has a boyfriend named Paul. Paul wants to hug Susan very close. Susan says, no, do not hug me. Paul hugs Susan anyway. Is that consent? No, she did not say yes, right? And both people need to agree to the touch, whatever kind of touch it is. And then another example, Alice and Maria are girlfriends. Maria likes it when Alice rubs her back. Alice asks Maria if she'd like a back rub. Maria says yes. Is this consent? Yep, she said yes. And Alice didn't say anything like, if you don't let me rub your back, I won't ever be, I won't ever take you out on a date again, or I won't, or I'm just going to hold you down anyway and rub your back, right? Like, it was freely chosen. She asked, the person said yes. No pressure or threats. And also just to remember that it's your body and you get to decide what's right for you. So really encouraging people to speak up when they don't feel comfortable with certain kinds of touch in the workplace or outside of the workplace too. But I think one of the things with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is a lack of bodily autonomy, a lack of feeling like it's their body, their life, their mind. They get to decide what's right for them. So the more we can encourage people to speak up and say what they need and want, it helps them regarding consent and relationships too. So I often start with the different kinds of relationships that we're in. So you could ask somebody, what are the different kinds of, who are you in relationships with? So they might say, my mom, my best friend, Tiffany, my teacher, my coworker at the farm, right? So lots of different kinds of relationships. And then what we can do is categorize them into really 5 different categories. So the first one, close family and friends. So we might show this picture to somebody and say, what kind of a relationship do you think this is? And, or you can say, this is a close family and friend relationship. How do we know that they're close? And maybe they're friends or family. And you can look at their bodies, right? They're really close together. Their cheeks are touching. One has the arm around both of them. So they're actually touching and there's a closeness there. And you look at them and they look pretty happy and safe and they feel good, right? So you can talk about both the feelings you have with close family and friends and the way you touch. And it may be different depending on your family. So some families hug, especially if they haven't seen each other in a long time. Some families kiss on both cheeks, right? So how does your family touch one another, especially when you haven't seen each other in a long time? Then we move into casual friends or groups. So what are the feelings we have? So this is a basketball team and they look pretty comfortable because they know the people, right? They know them, but they're not really close to them, meaning they do things outside of basketball practice. So they're comfortable, they know the people, they're not strangers. And then how do we touch? And what I recommend, and this is true for coworkers as well, is fist bump, high five, or handshake. So this is for casual friends or groups or your coworkers. I'm going to go to coworker next. Like this is a picture of coworkers. These are actually, this is someone from Project Search. So you feel comfortable with coworkers because you know them, you work with them. But how do we touch? Again, would be a fist bump, high five, or a handshake. And then there's helping professionals. So this might be a doctor or a nurse. And we can feel pretty comfortable with helping professionals if we know them pretty well. But if we're meeting a doctor for the first time, sometimes we can feel a little bit uncomfortable. We don't know them. We're not quite sure. But like a teacher or someone else like that you see at the grocery store all the time, they're a helping professional. So they're paid to support you in some way. So we feel relatively comfortable and we fist bump, high five, or handshake. We don't hug, helping professionals. And then strangers or people you don't know. And I often find that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities feel a lot of anxiety around strangers, that they have been taught stranger danger. You know, that strangers are scary and dangerous and you want to stay away from them and don't talk to them. And so there's a lot of anxiety about strangers. But the misleading piece here is that when someone with a disability is violated or abused, it's oftentimes someone they know. And they kind of think that the only people that are going to hurt them are strangers. So I like to give the message that there's lots of really nice strangers in the world. And yeah, sure, not all of them, but also people that you know can hurt you as well. It's not just strangers that can hurt you. And that we don't touch strangers. And that's just sort of a general rule. We might talk to them. Some people love to talk to strangers, but other people don't. And either one is fine, but we don't touch strangers. So we don't touch people we don't know. And here's another example of a relationship, an intimate, romantic, sexual relationship. And they, you know, we can tell because they're they're sort of snuggling up and you don't really kiss your mom like that. You know, it's kind of a more of a relationship kind of kiss and they look happy and they touch in different ways depending on what they both agree to as far as touch goes. So we can think about ourselves and then all the relationships that we have with coworkers, family. So we got lots of relationships in our life, and that's part of who we are too. So types of relationships, this is a handout that I provided for you that's really helpful in thinking about the different kinds of relationships and how do you touch in those relationships. So we'll do that first, and then we'll talk about public and private. But for example, close family and friends, they may hug, or like I said, depending on the family or how you approach people you're really close to, that might be a little bit different. But casual friends, family, and groups, we're going to fist bump, high five, and handshake. Same with coworkers. Same with helping professionals as well. And then we don't touch strangers. And then if we're in a sexual romantic relationship, there's different ways of touching each other. And that has to be worked out between the two people too, about how they want to touch. And you always have to get consent for any kind of touch. And then there's also, so if we're looking at all those categories, then we also want to ask, well, what about customers or patients or guests or clients? And I don't know, on the farms that you're working on, are there customers that come to the farm? And so that's like another category of people. And if you just, you don't know the person, then they're actually a stranger. But we often say we don't, people think they can't talk to strangers. So we want to put them more in the casual friends groups category. So we fist bump, high five, handshake, but we're not going to hug and we're not going to ignore them. And then also looking at, you could get lots of different pictures and they could try to figure out what kind of relationship it is. And maybe you have some of customers or coworkers that you could use, and they could figure out all the different kinds of relationships. And then who are the people in your life in these relationships? And I think what you'll find sometimes with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is that they'll have close family and a helping professional, maybe a direct support person or a teacher in their life, but not a lot of friends and not a lot of groups that they're part of. And hopefully coworkers because they're working at the farm. So what we can also do is try to help them meet friends too, like I mentioned earlier, or a partner if that's something they're interested in as well. So how do we help them have all different kinds of relationships in their life? So these are just examples of where you can, write down the people in your life. There's some videos I have here as well that you can use. You can just click on this link and it's on the Elevatus training website resource page. And it just shows two strangers walking by each other. So you can see like the body language and how they don't touch or interact really. They might smile at each other. And then you might have a co-worker relationship. So there's a video you can use on that and talking about the relationship, as well as really good friends where they haven't seen each other and they hug and they're loud and they're happy. And so sort of showing those different kinds of relationships that we're in. So you can use that. And this is just kind of a summary. Like if you look at reading 1, 2, and 3, strangers, you have just quick look at eye to eye, right? Or look at the person. It's a very fast, brief eye contact. Then the greeting 2, the coworker, it's a little bit longer. They chat for a minute, not a minute, even 20 seconds, and off they go. And then the friends, there's much more eye contact. They're looking at each other, they're smiling, coming towards each other, know about each other's lives outside of where you might be when you see them. And so it's just a great way to show the different relationships. And then we also want to talk about public and private. And what I say all the time is the workplace is public, no matter if there's a door that you can close, everywhere is public in a workplace. So what these mean, so public is where other people are there or might be there. It's a place that people can go in and out. And private is where you're alone and no one can come in and out. Now you might be with someone in a private place, but people can't come in and out. And to really, because I know a lot of people have talked about some of the issues in the workplace of people doing private things in, the bathroom at the workplace, but we want to think of it as, even if it's a one-stall bathroom, it's still a public restroom. It's not private, which would be at home in your bedroom with the door closed or the bathroom with the door closed. And then you can show different pictures to talk about the different kinds of places, public or private. So we got a public place here. How do you know? There's people there. Well, what if you're the only one on the bus? People can come in and out. So it's public. Bathroom with the door closed at home and people can't come in and out. Private. Movie theater, there's people there, but if you're the only one there, you and your partner, and you're in the back and it's dark, isn't that private? Nope, because people can come in and out. And this one's kind of tricky because we're not quite sure where it is, but and also there's a conversation about bathing suits. Like this is a public place, like a park or at the beach or something, or at a pool. So it's okay to wear a bathing suit, but you can't wear a bathing suit in the grocery store. And so you can wear a bathing suit in some public places, but not all. And then really talking about other examples of public places, or are there public places in your home, depending on where the person lives. You know, they're living in a group home, and therefore then there's lots of people in the living room, so that would be considered public place. But if you live by yourself in a one-bedroom apartment, really your whole apartment can be private if people can't come in and out of your apartment. It's great to talk about the different kinds of topics too. So public topics are things like the weather, the movie you went to, the game last night, the Oscars, right? So it might be things that you can talk to anyone about. And then private things are more personal. They're more about our bodies, maybe about our relationships, or sexual things, or sexual parts. Sometimes money, people feel like, is a really private thing as well. So there are some topics that are more private too. So we want to talk about that. But what about behaviors in public and private? And I'll often ask people, like, how can you touch others in a public place? So you can hold their hand, you can hug them quickly, you can do a quick kiss on the cheek, you can high five and fist bump, you can put your arm around someone, you know, again, as long as everyone's okay, both people are okay with it. But I'll also will ask about kissing. Like, what if you're in a restaurant and there's a couple in the corner and they're not just kissing, they are kissing. And they're, you know, got their arms all around each other. And usually somebody will say, get a room, right? Which really means I'm uncomfortable. I want you to go to a private place because you're doing private things. So we want to talk about some of those ways we act in public versus private. And also, if you're in a romantic sexual relationship with someone at work, and I know some people said, like, unsure quite how to handle some of that. If you have policies that it's okay to be in a sexual romantic relationship with people that you work with, you can set some boundaries around that. And what I often teach is, when you're at work, no matter what, everyone is a coworker, even if it's your mom or your partner. When they're at work with you, they're your coworker. So you're going to treat them like coworkers. You're not going to run up and give them a big kiss or a hug. And so we treat them like coworkers. When we leave work, then they go back to this idea of being family and friends or partners. So at work, every place is public and all people are coworkers. What are things that are private? We talked about that. Places that are private, body parts that are private as well. So body parts need to be covered in public places. So that would be another conversation. I don't know if that would come up so much. Sometimes people might have their hand down their pants at work and things like that. So we can't touch our sexual parts in a public place. So you're going to have to stop. So what's okay to talk about in private? Lots of things. It's okay to talk about in a private place, like your bodies and your feelings and your relationships and things. And then also, who is it okay to talk about these things with? So this, I'm going to bring us back to this handout again. So when we're looking at topics, close family and friends, it's okay to talk about public and private things. But when you talk about private things, you want to be in a private place. And then as far as casual friends, family, group, casual family, group, public things only. And then again, coworkers, same. We just talk about public things at work. So it's a public place. We just talk about public things at work. Now, a helping professional, again, we're going to talk about only public things, unless maybe it's a doctor or a nurse and you're in an exam room and the door is closed. Or maybe you're talking to your teacher or an instructor, someone that helps you in a private place about a problem that you're having and you need some help. but we're not going to talk to all helping professionals. So if you go to the grocery store and you're buying some items, we're not going to talk about private things with the person that's checking our groceries through or bagging our groceries or the deli counter. We only talk about private things with certain helping professionals. And then people we don't know, if you're comfortable, you can talk about public things. And then the last thing is public and private. So sexual romantic relationships, but you have to talk about private things in a private place as well. So that just kind of helps some of those healthy boundaries in the workplace, kind of understanding the types of relationships, the type of touch and topics, and as well as public and private. And then this is just a scenario that you can use to talk about all of these concepts. So this is two females at work and they work in a hospital, and one person ends up asking a bunch of really personal questions. And I think it's two parts. One is how to try not to bother someone else or harass someone else. But also, if someone's bothering you, how to speak up too. So there's some debriefing questions as well that can help both people understand the boundary and also speak up when your boundary is being crossed. And then I think the other thing that comes up a lot in the workplace is the difference between a coworker and a close friend. That it's confusing. So people will say, well, they're really nice to me. They're really friendly. So that means they're my friend. But there's a difference between being somebody's friend and being friendly. So we'll talk about both of these things. So comparing close family and friends and coworkers, we touch differently and we talk about different things with, right? So even though our coworkers are friendly, they're nice to us, they say hi, it doesn't mean they're our friend. They're actually our coworker. If we did something with that person outside of work, then they might become our friend. And then the friend, being friendly and friends, and really explaining that difference as well, that we're friendly to a lot of people at work, but it doesn't mean that we're their friend or they're our friends. Friends have a relationship that they've worked on outside of work, and they go to the movies together and they call each other on the phone and these things outside of work. People at work are friendly, but they're not our friends. They're our coworkers. So I didn't really check in about any questions. Any questions at this point? And then I want to talk about responding to behaviors and see if there's any more questions after that. Anybody, anything at this point? You can unmute, you can put it in the chat. I'm going to keep talking unless I see some questions pop in the chat but a couple things that I think are really helpful too is thinking about, well, what happens when some of these boundaries get crossed in the workplace? Like how do I manage them? And the advice I give people is respond to the behavior, not react. And we, as a culture, we tend to be more reactive about relationships and sexuality. So just kind of put that in your head, like respond, don't react. We want to name the behavior or comment to the person as you see or hear it, if it's a comment. So we might say, we're going to describe the behavior that we're seeing. And then we want to state the healthy work boundary in a supportive way. And we can add any specific work site rules or culture or policies or anything. So we can kind of redirect and use it as a teachable moment. But then the other thing is really thinking about, well, why do they keep doing this? Why are they asking customers out on dates? Like, why is this happening? So we can really analyze what's underneath it, because behavior is communication. So it's telling us something. So what is happening underneath that behavior? What is a need that's trying to be met? And is there a way to replace this with something else? Because if we just say, no, you can't do that at work, like I said before, the need is still there and it's going to keep coming back unless we figure out a way to meet that need in a different way. Just a few things to consider. Sometimes it's an environmental issue, can be the reason or the hypothesis around why this is happening. Yeah, I'll take it. talk about that in a second, Andrea. So is it something in the environment that is causing this behavior? Maybe they live somewhere where this behavior is being modeled. Maybe they have no privacy at home. And they live at home with their parents, and their parents don't let them have any privacy. And so they're going to sneak off at work where they can find some privacy. So is it something environmental? Is it being modeled, like I mentioned before? Is it because they're asking you out, you're their supervisor all the time? Is it because they have no one else except family and they can't ask their family out? So is it their partner selection? They only have this one person that isn't a family member? Is it because they haven't been taught how to court someone? So really teaching, like, how do you get to know someone and build that relationship? Is it something with sexual knowledge? So maybe it's something around public and private and they don't know the difference between the two or something, is it like some content needed or even learning history, like they've been told certain things? And then one of the things that can come up too is this idea of perpetual arousal. And that's something that can be really tricky because some people with disabilities have trouble masturbating and releasing. And so they're kind of always aroused, which sometimes comes up in the workplace around someone being aroused a lot. So you might have to kind of figure this piece out as well. Or is it a medical issue or medication change? Sometimes people have a change in dosage and then different behaviors emerge. And is it because no one's told them it isn't okay? So, and this can be tricky because they're in a work environment and maybe you're like, oh, it's fine. They didn't mean anything. But we really want to treat people with disabilities the age that they are. If they're 21 and working on the farm, we want to have the same expectations that we have of any 21-year-old around touch and public and private and how you treat people and all of that. So sometimes we have to teach some of that too. So what guidelines, rules can employers put in place that can help people with IBD respect work appropriate boundaries? I'm not sure guidelines and rules. I mean, unless you've got guidelines and rules, or maybe you're feeling like you have to have even more, be really concrete about what's okay and not okay. So again, you could say things like, this is a public place. So everything we do here is public. And so how can you touch people in a public place? Or what are some topics you can talk about in a public place? So maybe using some of those handouts to kind of teach, or coming up with guidelines that are very much, this is okay to do at work and this is not okay to do at work. It's okay to do that somewhere else, just not at work. So that would be my suggestion around guidelines and rules, is using some of these ideas to create some what's okay to do in the workplace and what isn't. Any other questions at this moment? We've got 15 minutes. I was going to go through some scenarios and just kind of show you how you can address them. So please put in the questions in the chat if you have others, because we have 15 minutes left here. But an employee tries to hug you every time they see you. All right, so you're working on the farm, the employee shows up and they try to hug you every single time. So what are some ideas you have about what you might do or say in that situation? Anybody have any ideas? Or maybe this has happened and what have you done? Any thoughts about that one? They try to hug you every time. And thinking about the handouts that I showed you as well. So I'll take you through this one. So we might say, there's different kinds of relationships, and you and I, or I'm a coworker. The way we touch coworkers is a fist bump, handshake, or high five. Let's try one of those. Which one would you like to try to say hello to me? I think if you have had the lessons you showed before, you can talk through the fact that you are exactly right. Yeah, so you might have to teach some of that in those teachable moments, right? So you're saying, there's many different kinds of relationships, like family, friends, coworkers. I'm a coworker to you. And how we touch coworkers is this way. Which one would you like to try to say hello? Right. So you're teaching in that moment those concepts. An employee asks you out on a date. So someone with a disability keeps asking you out on a date. Again, it might depend on your policies in the workplace. So it might be there's different kinds of relationships, and I'm a coworker. Depending on the situation, you might say coworkers can't go out on dates with one another. So I'm asking, what is your policy? Is it okay for coworkers to do that? Okay, if it is, maybe then it's, and I'm not interested in a relationship with you or going out on a date with you, but thank you for asking me, right? So really being clear. And then if they keep asking, then then it can be a problem, right? Then it can be seen as sexual harassment because you've already said I'm not interested and they keep asking you out. So we want to teach that when someone says no, we have to respect that no. Someone that you could potentially go out on a date with would be a friend who you want to be more than friends. Maybe you want to go out on a date with some of your friends or people that you know. So we're not just saying no, we're saying here are some other ways that you can get a date. And then two employees are found in the closet touching each other's bodies, right? And this is actually a true story. And somebody said when they found the two people with disabilities in the closet, they said, you're not allowed to be in here. The workplace is public or whatever they said. And the people said, well, they do it on Grey's Anatomy, right? So they're learning from a television show that at the hospital, people go in the broom closet, right? So we want to teach, because if that's your teacher, your relationship teacher, Grey's Anatomy, then you might have some different ideas about how you behave in the workplace. So they're touching each other's bodies. Again, it's okay that you want to touch each other, but it has to be done in a private place and not at work. Do you have a private place at home? They may not, which is why they're in the closet too. So it might be a conversation about them speaking up at home for some privacy as well. All places in the workplace are public, even if you close the door and no one else is in there. Depending on your specific work site policy, you can add additional information. So, but again, even if this is your partner or significant other, the workplace isn't where we're going to touch each other's bodies. When they're at work, they're a coworker. So those are just some examples of how you can talk about it using the concepts that I was talking about before. And I think too, when somebody starts working, it might be a place to have some of this orientation around workplace relationships for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as well. So any more questions? And we got 10 minutes left. I'm happy to talk about this content or other things that are on your mind regarding sexuality and healthy relationships for people with disabilities. I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions from anyone? I do want to show you the handouts as well. Any questions? Oh, how do you teach? Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. So is it ever okay to ask a customer out? I mean, what's your take on that? Andrea, is it like in general, is it okay for someone to ask a customer out? Like, can you ask a customer out?
Right. I think that's the question is when is it appropriate and when it's not, and how do you how do you make that suggestion or guideline?
Right, right. I mean, I think again, it is kind of the same thing you were talking about around rules. Is it okay to ask a customer out? I think in general, probably not, right? I mean, it's just kind of like that's not what they're doing there. But I don't know.
Okay.
Have people ever asked a customer out and become partners? I don't know of anybody in particular, but maybe if it's a regular customer, right? And you ask someone out after a while, that might be all right. I think, I think the hard part is teaching those nuances. Like you might kind of have a sense of when it's okay or not. And so how do you make that concrete and clear about okay? Are there any rules around a parent guardian saying they don't want you to talk? Right. That's a really good with their adult child. Yeah, it's a good question. Do you tend to have people that are their own guardians, or are they sometimes the parent are their guardians? I guess the first question, are they all adults that are working in the farms? Are there any teenagers? None of ours are their own guardians, and they are all adults. Okay, so that would be, what people tend to do is if they're their own guardian, then they feel like they can talk to them about anything. But I think you also have to be, it has to be a little bit, you have to set up a boundary around it too. So you could say, it seems like you're really interested in meeting someone. Why don't we talk about this after work? And I can give you some ideas about how you meet people, right? Because you don't want them coming up to you in the middle of work to talk about these things. So this is a private topic. And are you willing to help someone with that? And if they're not their own guardians, you may want to talk to the parents about it. That they're asking lots of questions about this. And I think then you're working with parents who might be resistant to this idea that their child can date or have a partner. And that's kind of a whole other topic around how do you work with parents around this. And what I often will say to parents is, when I'm talking about this, what I'm trying to do is help them have healthy relationships and not lose their job. And so I think they really want to partner. And so they keep asking all of the coworkers out, and people have said no, and they keep asking. So it seems like they really need to learn how to meet other people outside of the workplace. I'm happy to talk about it, but I wanted to let you know this is happening and whether you could help me or not. Now, some parents are going to say, absolutely not, do not talk about it. And they may have to hit bottom before they're ready to feel open about this. Sometimes parents will say, nope, 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 until their child loses their job. And then it's more of a discussion around why they lost their job too. So I don't know if that helps at all. I think also we're trying to, parents are very worried about sexual abuse. And so part of talking about healthy relationships is talking about how to prevent sexual abuse too, which I know many parents are worried and want their child to be protected. So I guess I'm sort of curious what you all think, because I don't know your work scenario so much. Like, do you talk to parents often about the work? And I mean, or do you have a relationship with their parents or no? So none are their own guardian, but they are adults. So do you end up talking about other things with the parents since they are their guardians? Currently, we just have residents here in a job training program. Okay, we do have good relationships with parents. Great. Yeah, so maybe it's, yeah. So I think for building that relationship with the parent, respecting that they are the parents and, they've been there from the get-go, and partner with them on this. Like, we're seeing this is happening and they might need some education around blah, 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 blah. I just wanted to talk to you about that. And I'm happy to talk to them, or do you want to talk to them? I think that would be the way to do it. Yeah, I gotcha. It's good. Think ahead. And like I think it's really good if you've got adults who are not their own guardians to form good, positive relationships with the parents, even before anything happens. Because when some of this more uncomfortable stuff happens, you've already got some trust between you too. So I think thinking about the future, building that relationship with the parents, because if they are their guardian, they're going to have a lot to say. and a lot of thoughts and know a lot about how they can learn about the topic, or what's going on at home or in their home. So I think forming that relationship is really, really important. I do not believe like legally parents or guardians can stop someone from having an adult conversation, but it's probably safer. That's what most agencies do. If they're not their own guardian, they run it by the parent. Just because I have heard some stories where parents have taken it, even if it wasn't their own kid that had some kind of experience, other people that are there had some kind of experience and they get pretty upset. So I think it's the way most people manage things. So Red Wiggler Farm, your hand's up.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you so much for this wonderful training. It's been awesome. I'm sorry we can't have our camera on. There's a lot of us here.
That's okay.
I'm Becca, by the way, and I had a specific question. I would love your idea for language to respond to when people are discussing others in a way that's discussing a relationship that may or may not exist. Um, so I'm not really wording this correctly, but sort of discussing their coworkers, either with them or without them present, and talking about, oh, that's my girlfriend, that's my boyfriend, or I want them to be my girlfriend.
Yep.
And especially when that other person isn't present,
Yeah.
how do you kind of manage that without shutting it down? Because that's,
Sure.
they're saying something that they might be thinking about.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so just an idea for a response, maybe related to public and private or respect and consent.
Yeah. 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 So maybe something around, well, I guess I would say that, your desires to be in a relationship with someone, or you're in a relationship with someone, is really a private thing. And at work, we really just talk about public things. If you want to after work and you're willing, after work, I'd be happy to talk with you a little bit about that. But would that work, Becca? That kind of like, we don't really do this while we're at work. And I don't know, are you willing to talk to them about private things? Or you could say, do you have someone you can talk about this relationship with that you trust and could be really helpful to you?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, thank you. That's
they're
helpful.
kind
That's
of
helpful.
they're kind of treating you like a friend in some ways, right? That's what you tell your friends, like, oh my God, I have such a crush on this person, right? They're kind of treated, but you're actually a coworker. And so we don't talk about private things with coworkers. And if you're willing to talk, great. If not, help them find someone they can talk to.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, sure. I love these lessons. We can work on what are different types of relationships and appropriate ways to engage without even discussing actual sexuality. Exactly. With both residents and yes, exactly. Because really, I mean, sexuality is way beyond, it's all about relationships, and it's not even about sex lots of times. And when I did the work with Project Search, they were like, we don't really want to talk that much about sex. We want to talk more about relationships. We do have a young man who likes to give a hug to trainees each morning, which has not been an issue, but I see now we should think about that, because in the actual, yeah, I think, that's the one thing we want to, I suggest, is just always asking yourself, do I hug everybody at work? I'm not sure that's a good idea, and whether they have a disability or not, because you are coworkers. And it does kind of set people up. Yeah, it might be okay in this scenario, but it's hard for people to generalize. We want people to have consistent repetition, like, oh, right, I'm at work, so we don't do this. Not just sometimes we do this. So I think for consistency, it would be helpful not to hug, because you're coworkers. And I don't hug my coworkers unless I'm friends with them outside of work. So maybe that would be helpful. Yeah, but I think it's good to just sort of think through, like, am I somehow setting somebody up? Because if I'm talking about private things at work or touching them in ways that's more like a friend, they might think everybody's a friend and get in trouble. So hopefully that helps give you some ideas about either thinking about the future or managing things right now. And I think there's some handouts you can take a look at. And in my slides, I've got my email and our website too. So, oh, and it looks like Andrea put an evaluation in the chat as well. So I'm available if you have any further questions or anything. We did create a curriculum with Project Search, and that's something you might be interested in because it's got lots of different lessons. I don't know if you feel like you can really take that on, and this might be enough. That is another resource for you. And there's a resource page in the handouts of different resources that might be helpful to you too. So thank you everybody for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. And for everybody that is on the meeting today, we are going to follow up with an email. It will link back again to the handouts that Catherine had shared. It will link also to that evaluation, but in the chat. We would love it if you took just a couple minutes there to fill that out. As I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we did receive some funding from Northeast SARE, and part of our funding is letting them know how we're doing, and we love to hear from you, so that evaluation and survey is really helpful. So thank you, Catherine, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for your time, for your questions, for your interest, and you'll get an email soon with a little follow-up on this. One quick note, our last webinar, Lunch and Learn, is scheduled for a week from today on the 28th. And there's going to be a discussion around adaptive tools. Adaptive farming strategies. So folks will be discussing the adaptive farm tools and techniques that they're using at their places. So join us then. Registration is on our website. And thanks again to everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, you as well.
Right on.